at his feet, and Deborah went up with him. Now Heber the Canaanite, which was of the children of Hobab, father-in-law of Moses, had severed himself from the Canaanites and pitched his tent unto the plain of Zaanaim, which is by Kadesh. And they showed Sisera that Barak, the son of Abinoam, was gone up to Mount Tabor. And Sisera gathered together all of his chariots, even 900 chariots of iron, and all the people that were with him, from Harosheth of the Gentiles unto the river of Kishon. And Deborah said unto Barak, Up, for this is the day in which the Lord hath delivered Sisera into thine hand. Is not the Lord gone out before thee? So Barak went down from Mount Tabor, and 10,000 men after him. And the Lord discomfited Sisera and all of his chariots and all of his hosts with the edge of the sword before Barak, so that Sisera lighted down off his chariot and fled away on his feet. But Barak pursued after the chariots and after the host unto Harosheth of the Gentiles, and all the hosts of Sisera fell upon the edge of the sword, and there was not a man left.
All right, so verse 10, we are told that Barak called Zebulun and Naphtali to Kadesh. And so as we talk about the first battle that they're going to have, he's going to call two different nations to fight. But as we find out in chapter 5, there's going to be at least a total of 6 nations that will fight. And so Naphtali and Zebulun, now they're northern tribes. And of course, remember, this area that we are at is going to be up in the Galilean area. So Kadesh is here. We talked about Megiddo, which is in this area, and then the mountains. And so this is the area they're going to be fighting in on the northern side. So we talked about this the first time we've seen a northern oppression, I guess. And then he's going to call these two nations, and there's going to be 10,000 men. And so 10,000 men will join him at Kadesh. And so they are now going to go fight. Now, verse 11 kind of seems out of place. First part of verse 11, well, verse 11, first part of 12. Kind of seems out of place because here we are talking about the battle, and then all of a sudden now we start talking about Heber, the Kenite. Well, there's a reason for that. So verse 11, it says, Now Heber the Kenite, the children of Hobab, the father-in-law of Moses, have separated himself from the Kenites and pitched his tent near the terebinth tree at Zan, which is beside Kadesh. Now, we learn about Heber. We learn that he was of the family of Moses, his father-in-law. So he is relation in some way to the Israelites. And the nation that he is from is from this area of Judah. So when they settled, they settled down in this area of Judea. So they were basically incorporated into the tribe of Judah and had good relations with them. I mean, there was no fighting between the two. They were just like they were part of the nation. But we learn about Heber here, who was different. Now, they're from Judah, but Heber is up in Galilee. He's up north. Why is the case? Well, Heber is now he's a sympathizer of Sisera. He's a sympathizer of the Canaanites. And so he is going to betray his nation in favor of Sisera. Now, he was a friend of Sisera. He reports of where Barak is to Sisera. That's verse 11 and 12. And so we read verse 12. It says, And they reported to Sisera that Barak, the son of Abinoam, had gone up to Mount Tabor. So he's going to spy, in a sense, on basically his own people to Sisera. And Knox said this, the Kenites normally lived in the south of Israel in the tribe of Judah. This verse shows why this Kenite happened to be in the area with his wife, Jael. They had simply separated themselves for whatever reason from the rest of the Kenites and moved to this region. And that's stated in verse 10. It says he separated himself. What do you think that meant? Not only physically separated himself from his own people, but what else? Yeah, Eber was a sympathizer, but as we see with Jael later, was she? No. And so I think that's interesting. And so verse 13, well, and like I said, verse 12, he went and told Sisera where Barak was, and prepared him to go fight. So then verse 13 says, and they reported to, or verse 13, so Sisera gathered together all of his chariots, 900 chariots of iron, and all the people who were with him from Haresha Hagamon to the river Kishon. And so back to this river we talked about last week. Remember, this river Kishon is a wadi. And so right here is a wadi. And so at times this is going to be have no water in it. And then there's going to be times where it's going to be raging with a lot of water. And so, as Kaufman stated, he thinks that that's going to play a part into why Sisera and his army was defeated, because God used the flooding of a wadi to disable the chariots. Now, we don't know if that's the case. It doesn't tell us. It's just interesting thoughts. But that river there it could have played a part in that. So verse 13, he goes to this valley. Verse 14 says, then Deborah said to Barak, up, for this is the day in which the Lord has delivered Sisera into your hand. Has not the Lord gone out before you? So Barak went down to the Mount Tabor with 10,000 men following him. So Deborah tells Barak that God has already went before them. What's that mean to Barak? Yeah, God's already decided the battle. The battle has not even been fought yet, and God's already decided it. That shows, as we've seen many times, the power of God in control of nations. He disabled this army already, in a sense, because they have all of these chariots of iron. We talked about how fierce they were, and how advanced this technology was at that time, which was feared by many people. They had feared these chariots and did not drive them out when God told them to. But now God says, but Deborah, which she's speaking what God tells her, God's already defeated them. So you're going to a battle that's already defeated. How much confidence would that give you as a leader of an army, or as even a member of that army, to already know that you haven't fought this battle yet, but you're going to win no matter what? And so, this should give him a lot of confidence in the people too. And so, notice, see verse 14. And the Lord, verse 15, says, and the Lord rooted Sisera and all his chariots and all his army with the edge of the sword before Barak. So the word rooted there, it means to make, it's focused on a noise, making a noise, move noisily, or to confuse. And so what we're told is that God confused not the chariots, but what did he confuse? The horses would have confused the riders. So they're probably trained to fight within a certain formation, yet God confused their riders and horses to just go into chaos. And so there was no organization, and that is God's way of causing this defeats. Now, has God done this before with other armies? Think about, later, what's going to happen with Gideon? He's going to go down with 300 men against a massive army, and they're going to cause confusion, and they end up killing each other and things like that. God's done that many times. And so he's doing that here also. And so what do we see in verse 15? It says, and Sisera alighted from his chariot and fled away on foot. It means he jumped out of his chariot. He knew the battle was lost, and he is going to run and get away from that place. And so that brings us to verse 16. It says, Barak pursued the chariots and the army as far as Haresh Haggithom. So what is this place? We've seen this before. Where did they run to? And so it's up in that area. So these men run and they take off and they get away as far they think they're getting away. And Barak follows them and kills them and destroys all this army. And so the edge of the sword, verse 15, the Sisera alighted from his chariots and fled away on foot. But Barak pursued the chariots and he destroyed them. Not a man was left, verse 16. So then verse 17, however, Sisera had fled away on foot to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, for there was peace between Jabin, king of Hazor, and the house of Heber the Kenite. And so, where then does Sisera go? Well, to a place where he thinks is safe, right? So this also tells us that Heber was close by. He had pitched his tent very close, not very close, but in a way where he could be a part of this battle, in the sense of preparing Sisera to fight against Barak, as we already talked about. But he's close by. And so we read of him fleeing to Jael, and he thinks that this is going to be a safe place. Verse 17, and so I got this quote from Knox also. It says, "It is interesting he did not go to the tent of her husband, as the women had their own tents in those times. Possibly he thought the sympathetic nature of a woman that thought he would be safe in her care. Or possibly he thought no one would think to look for a mighty warrior hiding in a woman's tent. He must have felt safe here because there was an apparent treaty between Jabin and the Kenites." So that is interesting. He doesn't flee to Heber's tent. He flees to Jael's tent. And, you know, a lot of different thoughts on that. It could have been that he thought that no one would look for him there. He thought maybe she was a sympathizer also. Could have been. But regardless, he flees to her tent. And so that brings us to verse 18. So we want to read verse 18 through the end of the chapter now.
Jael went out to greet Sisera and said to him, "Come in, my lord, come in with me. Do not be afraid." So he entered her tent, and she covered him with a blanket. Sisera said to her, "Please give me a little water to drink, for I am thirsty." So she opened a container of milk, gave him a drink, and covered him again. "Stand at the entrance to the tent," he said, "and if anyone comes and asks you, 'Is there a man here?' say no." But as he lay sleeping from exhaustion, Heber's wife Jael took a tent peg, grabbed a hammer, and went silently to Sisera. She drove the peg through his temple and into the ground, and he died. When Barak arrived in pursuit of Sisera, Jael went out to greet him and said to him, "Come, and I will show you the man you are seeking." So he went in with her, and there lay Sisera dead, with a tent peg through his temple. On that day God subdued Jabin, king of Canaan, before the Israelites. And the hand of the Israelites grew stronger and stronger against Jabin, king of Canaan, until they destroyed him.
All right, so she goes into his tent, and then we find verse 18. Jael goes out to meet him. So he is headed to her tent, but she still goes out to meet him, and she says, "Come in here, you're going to be safe." That's deceptive, isn't it? That's because she's already, in my mind, I think she's already got a plan. She sees him, she knows who he is, she knows that she could be a part in subduing him, and so I think in her mind, she's forming a plan already and what she's going to do. But she convinces Sisera to come into her tent. Well, she's already headed there, and I think that's interesting to notice. He's headed towards her tent, and she meets him, because we see that in verse 17. She meets him and tells him to turn aside into her tent and to not fear. And when he had turned aside into her tent, she covered him with a blanket. And I think the King James says rug, doesn't it? On verse 19.
Mine says mantle.
Mantle.
Mine says rug.
Yours says rug. So there's different versions on what that is. It could be the rug, like at the base of the tent. But since he is going to fall asleep and she's trying to make him comfortable, I think it's more of a blanket. She brings him in, she covers him up with a blanket to hide him. And so, verse 19 says, then he said to her, please give me a little water to drink, for I'm thirsty. But she opened a jug of milk. Why?
Put him to sleep, maybe?
Yeah, to put him to sleep. It said that milk can make someone sleepy. I don't know if that's the case. Is that true? I don't drink milk, so very often, unless it's chocolate. It's more comforting than water. I know that I have gotten very thirsty in the middle of the night and drinking some milk, and it didn't really help my thirst. But
You don't think there was anything in the milk, do you?
I don't think there was any in the milk. It could have been just warm, just because it, they don't have refrigerators then. Maybe it had ice. I don't know.
I just
So
think it's so,
warm milk works.
I just think he had to be like out, to,
Yeah,
I
for
don't
this to
know, for
happen.
her to, put a peg in his temple.
I know. Well, and he asked for water, and she gives him milk. But somebody read chapter 5, verse 25.
He asked water, and she gave him milk. She brought forth butter in a lordly dish.
All right, so in chapter 5, in her song, she also recounts this occasion. And the King James says butter. What does ESV say?
Curds.
Curds.
Mine says cream.
Cream. And so again, different ideas. But it's something heavy. And so it's probably comforting. It's probably something that made him fall and to help him go to sleep. And so, it's interesting because he asks for water and she brings him milk and he doesn't argue.
If he'd been running, then he was tired.
Yeah.
And
He was.
afraid and thirsty.
And thirsty and afraid, yeah. So he's probably just taking anything he can get. But he's probably hungry, wore out, and so, the thought of having something very fatty, something like that, the milk, the butter, whatever, curds, it's probably more of the curds, I think, in that sense. That would have sufficed him to make him feel better and to fall asleep. And so,
Full stomach helps make you fall asleep.
oh yeah, full stomach always helps, right? You know that on Thanksgiving when you eat a big meal, you're always tired afterwards, right? And so she gives him that and he drinks. And so in verse 20 it says, and he said to her, stand at the door of the tent, and if any man comes and inquires of you, say, is there any man here? You shall say, no. And so not only is he tired now, as he's getting ready to fall asleep, he's saying, okay, you go to the door and lie. If anybody comes, tell them there's no man there, and so that he can feel safe. And so verse 21, then Jael-Heber's wife took a tent peg and took a hammer in her hand, and went softly to him and drove the peg into his temple. And it went down into the ground, for he was fast asleep and weary, so he died. And so she was quiet in how she approached him. She takes that tent stake and a hammer and drives it through his temple. And as Terry said, he had to have been pretty fast asleep for that to happen. But Kaufman said this, and it was interesting. It said that the business of pitching and striking the tent was usually assigned to the women among the nomads, and Jael, therefore, would have been quite skilled in the use of this equipment. So it's an interesting take on that. Remember we've talked about with a couple different judges, what was the tools that they used to fight against their oppressors?
What they use in their daily life.
Yeah, what they use in their daily life. We talked about Shamgar, who used the ox goad. And so, they're skilled in what they use. She would have been skilled in being able to drive these pegs very easily because it's what she's used to doing. So she takes something that's there that she is normally using and drives it into his head.
Well, she's good enough to take one hit.
Yeah, it probably did. She would lay that there and bam, one hit. And so I think if you go, chapter 5, I don't think I have this note here, but it talks about recounting this account in chapter 5, and it said that she removed his head when she did this. stretched out her hand, a tent peg, her right hand to the workman's hammer. She pounded Sisera, she pierced his head, she split and struck through his temple. I think, it doesn't say it came off. I thought there was a version that did. I think it was the King James. Did King James say the same thing?
26.
Yeah.
Excuse me, and with the hammer she smote Sisera, she smote off his head.
Yeah, that's right. So King James says smote off his head, but New King James says it split and struck through his temple, and pierced his head. So,
The BSB says, she struck Sisera and crushed his skull.
yeah. I think the crushing or the splitting is probably what more happened there, not just removing his head, but it could be the splitting it apart. But whatever the case may be, it's very violent, and it was going to kill him like that. And so she does it far enough that it sticks into the ground. So he wasn't getting up anyways, but he wasn't going to move with that peg in the ground. And so these tent stakes were made of metal and were very large. And so from that time. So it would have been pretty gruesome for sure. So then verse 22, it says, and then as Barak pursued Sisera, Jael came out to meet him and said to him, come, I will show you the man whom you seek. And he went into her tent, and there lay Sisera dead with a peg in his temple. And so she goes out to meet Barak and told him that she had Sisera's body. Now, what did Deborah say was going to happen? What when she was speaking to Barak? You guys remember what she prophesied was going to happen?
It's going to fall at the hands of a woman.
Human.
Yep. That this army was going to fall at the hand of a woman. And that the prophecy happened, didn't it? That's exactly what happened here. Jael, yes, the army of 10,000 men went and defeated his people, but when you take the leader, what happens?
Crumble.
They're done. Okay? When you see battles where the king is killed, they disperse, they leave, it's over. And so here the leader, Sisera, is defeated, which would have ended the conflict of that fight, and it happened at the hands of a woman, it was Jael. And so that says that, everything happened as prophesied, but what does that say about Deborah?
She was a prophet.
She was a prophet. She was a prophetess, just like we were told. If the prophecies come true, then we know that the prophet is true. And so she truly was a prophetess of God. And so we get all those details there. Knox says this, in ancient times, it was considered absolutely shameful for a warrior to die at the hands of a woman. Surely, as Barak viewed the sight in the tent, the words of Deborah must have rang in his ears, right? Because he didn't want to go. Deborah says, I'll go with you. But the glory, the honor is going to go to a woman. And so as he's standing there, seeing this scene, in his mind, he's going, I remember what Deborah said. And who's the glory going to go to? Jael. It's going to go to Deborah and Jael, actually. And so, that's interesting take on that, and what he is thinking as he's standing there. All right, so then verse 23. It says, so on that day God subdued Jabin, king of Canaan, in the presence of the children of Israel. And the hand of the children of Israel grew stronger and stronger against Jabin, king of Canaan, until they had destroyed Jabin, king of Canaan. And so God subdued, right? That's what we see here. So if God subdued Sisera and the king of Jabin and all of this, that means God was behind all of this. What does that say about what Jael did? God had a hand in it. Now, some want to say, some commentators, many commentators really, want to say that Jael's actions were not approved by God. Okay? Because she was deceptive a little bit, by saying, come in here and you'll be safe. And then how she did that, all that was there. But this text tells us that God subdued him. It doesn't say Jael did it. It says so to me, God was approving of what happened here. God used different people throughout history to go to cause punishment on those that were afflicting his people, or to even afflict his people. And they were not good people sometimes. Now, it's not talked about, Jael's actions are not talked about or honored in any way in any other scripture of our text, except for chapter 5. Deborah's song, she definitely praises Jael for what she did. But we know that this battle was done by God, and God was behind it. And so, verse 24 tells us that the hand of Israel grew stronger and stronger against Jabin. What does that mean until they defeat them? What's that going to mean for how many battles are coming later? Probably more, right? There's not just this battle and it was over. There was going to be several battles. And so that helps us to see in chapter 5 when we see these other nations that have come in and been a part of this fighting, that they had fought in the following battles, not just this one. So, all right, any questions or comments on chapter 4? We still got a few minutes. We guess we could get into 5 a little bit. So chapter 5, there's not going to be a lot to discuss in chapter 5. This really just follows up after this battle and the things that we see with their conquest. But we call chapter 5 the Song of Deborah. And so there's not going to be a lot to discuss. It's more just her praising and recounting the events that have happened. And so we get a few more details here, but we're gonna basically read it and talk just about a few verses here. But somebody want to read verse 1 through, let's say, verse 9.
Then Deborah and Barak, the son of Abinoam, sang on that day, saying, when leaders lead in Israel, when the people willingly offer themselves, bless the Lord. Hear, O kings, give ear, O princes. Even I will sing to the Lord. I will sing praise to the Lord God of Israel. Lord, when you went out from Seir, when you marched from the field of Edom, the earth trembled and the heavens poured, the clouds also poured water. The mountains gushed before the Lord, the Sinai before the Lord God of Israel. In the days of Shamgar, son of Anath, in the days of Jael, the highways were deserted, and the travelers walked along the byways. Village life ceased, it ceased in Israel, until I, Deborah, arose a mother in Israel. They chose new gods, then there was war in the gates. Not a shield or spear was seen among 40,000 in Israel. My heart is with the rulers of Israel, who offered themselves willingly with the people. Bless the Lord.
All right, so it says in verse 1, the song of Barak and Deborah sang on that day. Now, it could be a reference to the day that they finally subdued and destroyed Jabin, king of Canaan. And that could be the case. It could be a reference to the day that they defeated Sisera. I don't know which day that is. It could be either one. But this is a song of victory, and it's going to be a song of her victory, really, as leading these armies to fight as a judge. And so verse 2, it says, when the leaders lead in Israel, when the people willingly offer themselves, bless the Lord. And so she's praising some of the leaders for finally standing up. And we see that in the last chapter. Verse 24 says that Israel grew stronger and stronger. That means the leaders started to finally stand up and to fight in the victory. They willingly, not only the leaders, but the people willingly fought along with Barak to bring about victory. But who ultimately received the glory here? Verse 2. Was it the people? Was it the leaders?
Bless the Lord.
It says bless the Lord. And so she still gives the victory to God. She still gives that victory to him because God was the one ultimately standing before them and subduing these nations. And so verse 3 and 4, he say, hear, O kings, give ear, O princes. Even I will sing with the Lord. I will sing praises to the Lord, God of Israel. who is the kings? Is there a king in Israel right now? No. Where are their kings? Other nations. So she's singing this song. She says, "Hear kings, hear princes. I will sing to the Lord. I will sing praise to the God of Israel." They trusted in their small g gods. They thought they had power and strength, these other nations, but who really has strength? God. And she is saying, you trust in your things, I'm going to trust in God. And she says, I sing the praises of the Lord. And that word Lord there is a reference to Yahweh. It's talking about God. And so that holy word that they would use. And so verse 4 says, Lord, when you went out from Seir, when you marched from the field of Edom. Mount Seir is in Edom. And as we talked about, the Edomites were descendants of Esau, right? And so it continues to say, the earth trembled and the heavens poured and the clouds also poured water. Now this is a song, and so it's using figurative language. But if you recount our study in Revelation, what does it mean when it talks about the earth shaking and the heavens pouring, the clouds pouring out water? Like all these drastic things. Yeah, God's control, God's power, right? So she's pulling in some of that language to talk about the power of God and His strength. And so this phrase is just focused on that power of God with Edomites. Somebody read Psalm 68, verse 7 through 9.
O God, when thou wentest forth before thy people, when thou didst march through the wilderness, the earth shook, the heavens also dropped at the presence of God. Even Sinai itself was moved at the presence of God, the God of Israel. Thou, O God, didst send a plentiful rain, whereby thou didst confirm thy inheritance when it was withering.
Okay, so he's talking about God marching from the field of Edom. And that's a phrase to the fact of God having power over the Edomites and power over them and their fighting. Now, the Edomites, we talked about them back in chapter 3, right? So that's during the time of Ehud. And then she's going to mention Shamgar in verse 6. And so she's recounting some of the times that they've already went through over the last, really, 40 to 100 years. And some of their lifetime. She's focusing upon some of the things that happened in their lifetime.